What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Great Scott, it's your True Crime Phil, a show so good it happens every Friday, and here they are. Detective Fil Waters in the lovely Hawaiian shirt, coming to you from the Big Island. He is America's most respected detective. He is the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigations. It was such an obvious nickname. I had never thought of it before, but he will now be known as one of two things: Uncle Phil, or better, Ferrari Phil. Ferrari Phil. Two F's. Someone tweeted that at me, and I said to myself, how could I be so dumb and
Still
not have.
Still working on that, by the way.
Oh, we are. I thought that was a done deal.
No. We're getting closer. We're getting closer.
Oh, how are your negotiating skills, Phil? I would hate to negotiate against you because you're a professional negotiator, basically.
Well, I'm paying for it what I want to pay for it, and that may change based on my mechanics inspection. So we're still in the process of.
Beautiful. Then, of course, competing with my new set is Scott Duffy, the former FBI supervisory agent out of the Delaware residency. I like how they say these things. Instead of a Delaware office, it is a residency. That means he lived there for 20 years. He never went home. And prior to that, he was a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is irritating me right now, that Commonwealth. He was a police officer there for 5.5 years. Before we get going with the show, and this is really not part of today's show, but last night, for those who are watching, and people are just still coming into the chat, and we're an hour early, so I'm going to do this probably at the tail end as well. But for those just joining us, last night we had Josh and Sandy Greenberg. Their daughter, Ellen Greenberg, was found dead back in 2011. If you do the math, that was 12 years ago. And they had filed a motion to have her cause of death changed from suicide to homicide, so it can actually be investigated because it is very suspicious. And the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania told them, no, we can't, because basically you can't touch a medical examiner, and there's many suspicious things surrounding this medical examiner. So I'm going to put up a photo right now, and I'm warning everyone it's a little disturbing, but Josh and Sandy Greenberg have given me permission, and not only that, have urged me to put it up. And this is the photo, and I'm going to ask the same question I asked last night. That is the picture. Ellen Greenberg stabbed 20 times. One of them is a 4-inch injury to her chest cavity where her heart sits. 2 of these injuries came after her heart stopped beating, otherwise known as post-mortem injuries, otherwise known as she was dead and stabbed herself 2 more times. At the bottom of your screen, you see text Governor Josh Shapiro to get justice for Ellen Greenberg. Coincidentally, just today, this very day, Josh Greenberg tweeted out to all his minions and the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that he can now be texted to. He can now text the governor today, as of today. And there's the number, 717-788-8990. Please, during the course of this show, in a nice way, text the governor and say, Governor, congratulations on Danelo Cavalcante. We saw you right up on that stage within 0.03 seconds taking credit for law enforcement's work. Now get credit for solving Ellen Greenberg's suspicious death. So I'm going to bring this up periodically. Please, that is the photo. And my question to you is, does this look like suicide? I will pose those questions to both Scott and Phil as well for a short answer, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes. Scott Duffy, you're not far from this area. Does this look like at first blush to you? And I know you're an investigator, but just looking at the photo, Scott Duffy, does this look like suicide or murder to you? And just your quick thoughts on this, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, at first thought, I would not think suicide. That would not be something coming to mind immediately. I know when we discussed this many episodes in a very short fashion, that I believe both Phil and I have been on scenes where they were wild scenes where you would think absolutely it was a homicide, and then the evidence and the scene dictated otherwise, and you ultimately have to follow the evidence and wherever it's taking you. But to answer your question, at first sight, I would not. That wouldn't be the first thing to come to mind.
America's most respected detective. He's investigated over 400 homicides. Fil Waters, have you ever come on a suicide that looked like this in your history, in your storied career?
Well, to answer that specific question, no.
And what does this appear to you looking at it?
Well, I'm going to do something that I very, very rarely do, is I'm going to reserve any commentary based on one piece of, for lack of a better term, I'll call evidence that was created by the, the grieving party. I enter every investigation, every homicide scene, open-minded and objective. And until I've had the opportunity, and I don't know that I ever will, but to look at this case from beginning to end, all the documentation, I'm just going to reserve comment. I don't want to say either way. So.
And I respect that. And that sounds like a very smart investigator who's been investigating homicides, over 400 of them.
Let me. I'm a detective. I'm not an investigator. So there is a difference. So.
Okay, there we go. The record is corrected. Detective, America's most respected detective, Abby Taha, which is was. There you go. Hi, adopted dad. Abby. Love to see your face. Scott and Joel's, of course. Happy Friday to my fave nation. Happy Friday to you. Julie Bala, that's a nice Irish name, which I don't know how to pronounce, became a YouTube member. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then you see Sybil Bergeron. I'm shocked that the medical examiner ruled that a suicide. Unbelievable. Justice for Ellen. A case has never frustrated me as much as this one. Makes my blood boil. That is why the text is down there. As of today, you can now text Governor Josh Shapiro of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. How ironic that we just did this story last night, and today he's accepting text. So Gail says, man, this court is driving me insane. I have to do something about that. Good morning, gentlemen. STS the best. Thanks so much. So as we always do, moving on now to as America's most respected detective refers to him, the evildoer, otherwise known as Bryan Kohberger. There's some news there. We're going to bounce around. Of course, like to remember the victims: Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and of course Ethan Chapin. And there's actually news with the victims, which we're going to start with, and that is it is the fall premiere of the big 3 true crime shows, Dateline 2020 in 48 hours. And so Saturday night, CBS, Peter Van Zandt, shout out to him, got exclusive interviews with the Gonzalez family and Xana Kernodle's family. And they spoke to him. And Xana's sister, whose name is Jasmine, and it's spelled Jazz, Jazzmin, spoke to 48 hours. And this is a direct quote. She says, "I don't know why it happened," meaning the murders. "I wish we knew. They were all 4 of them were just such great people and made such an impact on the lives around them." What was more fascinating, Detective Fil Waters, is that Xana's father, whose name is Jeffrey, spoke. He was asked if he believes his daughter fought back that night. And, they reportedly have seen some evidence that we have not seen. And he says, "I believe so. It's upsetting to think about." Your reaction, because there was then Steve Gonzalez, which I'll let Scott weigh in on, who also thinks that Kaylee was fighting back. What's your reaction, Fil Waters, to hearing this news that, according to them, their daughters in their most difficult moment in life, as their lives were being, ended by this horrific act that they were trying to fight back?
Well, I can certainly connect with the fathers in this thing. I have 2 daughters. Gosh, I can't even imagine what they're going through. And I'm sure there are the autopsy is going to reveal whether they were or were not fighting back. If there's a lot of defensive wounds, which I think early on there was some suggestion that there were, that these young women were, in the most literal sense, fighting for their lives. And I'm, as a father, I just it's a horrible thing to even have to consider. So, my prayers with those folks, and have been continuing to try to bring about some sense of peace. And I think that maybe that's only going to happen when this thing is finally adjudicated, finally resolved.
It's awful. Laura Waldy, I'm texting from Canada. You can text from anywhere around the world, including Tasmania, where we've had people watching the show from. Shaquille O'Meal says, definitely doesn't look like suicide. Moto says, texted. Good for you, Moto. We talked about this last night. It's going to be very difficult to affect change here. They basically said that Sandy and Josh Greenberg do not have standing to basically overrule the decision of the medical examiner in legal terms, but someone like the governor could step in here. And he says, I meant texting Governor Shapiro, so Hope G also texting. And look at this, this is where I went to college, Waltham, Massachusetts, texting the governor from Waltham, Massachusetts. I'm a graduate of Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. So thank you. Lost in OZ, in Oz, I guess that would be. Scott Duffy. Steve Gonsalves, who we've seen in the news before, his daughter, obviously, Kaylee Gonsalves, and I quote here, says, there's evidence to show that she, meaning Kaylee, awakened and tried to get out of that situation. She was assaulted and stabbed, and goes, and then the mother, Christy Gonsalves, continues and says, the bed was up against the wall. The headboard was touching the wall, and the left side of the bed was touching the wall. And we believe that Maddie was on the outside and Kaylee was on the inside, she says. The way the bed was set up, she was trapped. That's very eerie because it sounds like she could have had a shot, but she was trapped in there by the way the bed was set up. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so again, we're going to be hearing now some details and specifics that are very difficult for anyone to hear, but I can imagine the law enforcement and first responders that responded to this brutal crime scene and holding, that to the vest for the sake of the families and for the sake of what Idaho requires, with being a tight-lipped, that this information we're hearing from the family, which no doubt in my mind had come from personal interviews with the family from law enforcement, they are going to provide information to the loved ones. And they're going to ask them first, do you want to hear some of what is difficult to hear? You're going to, and law enforcement would rather tell them in a room with counselors and whatever family circle to have with them to hear it one-on-one, as opposed to, no, I don't want to hear anything, but when I go to court, it's all going to be on full display. So, and the fact that the families are starting to give tidbits of just how bad the crime scene is. It's very difficult to hear, but it does not surprise me that anyone fought to the end. Absolutely, 100%.
And it, kind of warms my heart in a way to know that they were fighting, that they were able to fight back. Unfortunately, the way it ended is horrific. Too bad they didn't do more damage is all I can say. Shout out to Mish coming to us from Cape Town, South Africa. I made it. She said she was not going to make it because already down under there, it is the Jewish New Year. Shana Tova, for those who do not know, is Happy New Year in Hebrew. And happy 5784 to everybody. Fil Waters, it is only 2023 here, but the Jews, it's 5784, Fil Waters, that we are embarking on. And back to Kohberger here. So Christy Gonzalez, Kaylee's mother, went on to say that she believes whoever did this, and they strongly believe it was Bryan Kohberger, was not expecting to find the two best friends together in the same bed. The direct quote here, I do think that his plan went awry. I do think that, he intended to kill one and killed four. Fil Waters, again, you haven't seen all the evidence, but what do you think? Do you think he was surprised by the second person in that bed that night?
Well, this is all just speculation based on what we know. I don't know that there may have, look, you've got several scenarios here, a couple of different scenarios. He may have been surprised, whichever one he was targeting upstairs, and not intending to have any contact with Xana and Ethan. And so he gets upstairs, and whichever one he was targeting, he may have been surprised by the other one being there, not knowing that she would be. And then when he takes care of what he does, and then he goes downstairs, he's wanting to get out of there. Now, all of a sudden, possibility that Ethan was emerging from that bedroom on the second floor. And again, another surprise he was not counting on, which caused him to take the action, survival, just to get out of there, that he took. So there are 2 or 3 different scenarios. I think that it's some part in this that, yes, he was surprised at some level, and that may be why this turned into a very chaotic scene in terms of the commission of the actual killings, and why he ends up dropping and leaving behind this key piece of evidence with this scabbard. So that would seem to me to indicate that things got to the extent that he had control, that they got out of control quickly, and we're seeing the results of that. So I think there's a good possibility that he was surprised at some point in the commission of this act.
There you see Ethan on the left. You've got Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, and of course Xana Kernodle, and both Xana and Kaylee Gonzalez's family speaking out. It is still a horrific crime to even think about. Almost coming up a year later. Speaking of coming up next Friday, this time you're going to probably be watching a live episode of this show from Crime Con, where I will finally meet Fil Waters and Scott Duffy in the flesh, and we will be doing this show. The only problem is I don't know how to do a show. I could barely do a show from a studio setup. I don't know how to do one from the road, but we are going to have the COE on that, and we're going to figure it all out. Steve Gonzalez, by the way, Scott Duffy, that's a beautiful new backdrop. May I ask where you're sitting? And I see an old-fashioned police car that my son would love right over your right shoulder.
So what part of the house am I in?
You're in the house. Okay, I didn't know if you're in the house, you're at the beach house. I didn't know where you were.
No, so I'm home. I'm in Glenside, and they're in another part of the house, my basement.
I love it. I love it. Jaws, one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. That looks almost like a Giants logo. It's kind of washed out, so I can't really make it out. But over your right shoulder in the back corner, what is that? Behind your right shoulder, Scott Duffy. Yeah, right there. What is that? Yes, that. What is that? Yes, yes, yes. That.
What's covering my window, or what is the picture?
Is that? What's the photo? Is that a photo? What's in the window? What's in the
Yeah,
window?
I mean, I could bring it. So the photo is my original task force, the task force that I was assigned with my state, local, city, county partners, and we were situated on the Wilmington Blue Rocks field along with Cal Ripken. Cal
Mm.
Ripken had made a tour post retirement, came to Wilmington, and specifically asked that we be on the field with him because he's a great benefactor to law enforcement, a very proponent of public safety. So we obliged him and
Wow.
took a photo op.
For those who don't know, Cal Ripken, the greatest Baltimore Oriole of all time, I would say. Would you say the same, Scott Duffy? Baseball player.
And definitely, and probably in most of baseball, he's up there.
Yeah, he sure is. So Scott Duffy, Steve Gonzalez, he says, and I quote, "We're not going to just sit back and cross our fingers and pray. We're going to get justice." He says that they're actually going to feel, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, so I can't find the exact soundbite, but that they're going to feel the Gonzalez. He's going to feel the Gonzalez's in court. They're going to be on top of him. And then he went on to say that they have information, he and his wife, that lead them to believe that Bryan Kohberger had made scouting trips to the student's house where the murders occurred. In other words, Bryan Kohberger was scouting out the house. They believe, and I quote here from Steve Gonzalez, Bryan Kohberger, had to know when people were coming, people were going. Scott Duffy, what do you make of that? They probably know a little more than we do. What do you think he might know that we don't know?
Yeah, and I imagine they are still being careful because they're not bound by what anybody in the prosecution and the defense team are bound by with regards to Idaho law in their pretrial statements. But we know from what was provided in the original warrant that was released, the affidavit, which supported both an arrest and search warrant, that there were at least 12 identified through his GPS tracking whatnot on his phone, that that he had 12 incidents where he was in the area, right, of the house. And this is throughout quite a few months, so not just leading up to. And we can only imagine where he had even gone beyond that. For example, was he putting himself in a position where he would stake the residents out for minutes, for hours? Who knows? And I imagine there is detail in records that have given law enforcement that very clue. Not to mention, you know, we get what we get with regards to the vehicle is seen here and there. But law enforcement, I'm sure, did due diligence in going to all the ring camera and surveillance video that's in any one of those residential neighborhoods, pulled them, and probably have mapped out seeing that vehicle to coincide with where his phone is going. So him getting out of the car doesn't surprise me. And I'm sure there's additional information to support that. I could easily see if there was some sort of massive party where he could find himself at least commingling, if not inside, outside, just kind of hanging out, and nobody giving him a second look. So I totally agree that with the evidence we know that was already in the warrant, and then what the parents and family are providing, that he probably got up pretty close to the house. I've always been, and I'm very interested in seeing what happens in trial. I've always been interested in I believe it was some sort of food delivery, a DoorDash or something,
Mm-hmm.
that was so close in proximity that the two did not somehow lay eyes on each other. So
Yeah.
that would be interesting. I'm more curious about those that we know witness wise were there relatively, within the time of the homicide, and little information has come out.
And that's a great point. Some people, the time overlapped almost with that Uber driver from when Kohberger would have been in the house. So it will be interesting to find out what that's all about. I love this. Melissa Schlomer finally catching Alive, right back to back with Neva Nix. Woohoo, made Alive. Thank you, gentlemen. Welcome to all of you. Varushka, shout out to you, was asking about becoming a Patreon/YouTube member. If someone in SDS Nation could help her, that'd be great. Shout out, by the way, to I Am Not T-Pain, who's now modding for us, if I may use that as a verb. Marie P says, hello, SDS Nation. See Frankie Figs, Copper Horse, Jersey's Own, Ketchup, Midwest Girls here, Teresa from the Republic of Ireland, and the list goes on. Don Hagerman here as well, another familiar name. Sarah Adams also. By the way, Fil Waters, people got a chuckle out of the fact that you said that it looked like I was in an office in hell. But you yourself commented before we went on air that you like the toned down lighting now. Do you prefer this, or do you prefer the office from hell?
No, I do prefer the look that you are not sitting in the pits of hell. Yes, no, I would prefer that look all day long. And but can I? Would you reread Mr. Goncalves' quote there about the trial?
The trial. Yes. Let me see. Oh, he says, this is the direct quote from Steve Gonzalez. He, meaning Bryan Kohberger, is going to feel all of us just staring at the back of his head, and he knows what he did to our daughter. Your thoughts, Phil? Open-ended question.
Well, I've said this before, and I understand his drive and his wanting to say what he says, but I would just he needs to be careful about what he's putting out there, and he needs to be even more careful about making some kind of statement like this where he is already telling people what they're going to be doing in the courtroom. And I will tell you, if what they do transforms itself into some sort of actual act, they're going to find themselves being thrown out of the courtroom and the possibility of a mistrial. Now, I'm hoping and praying none of this ever happens, but it disturbs me a little bit when I have been in trials where there has been an outburst by family members of the victim. It causes confusion, and it causes an atmosphere within the courtroom that doesn't need to be there. You've got to remember that this person is presumed innocent until they are convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. And making comments like this has always been my concern, that there may be some jury nullification. There may be a jury that's seated in there that has heard these comments, and they're watching him instead of paying attention to the testimony and the evidence. So it can become a distraction in the courtroom, in the trial, in the midst of a trial, if it comes to a trial. So I would hope that he's been pretty quiet here the last few months, but now we come up with this, and I get it. It's coming through the pain and wanting justice done, but to add to it that you're going to be there and you're going to be this and you're going to be doing that and they're going to feel my look, it doesn't provide anything in support of what needs to be done here in getting to that measure of justice. It does not help, and it can detract. So I would just, we all know, but just please keep that stuff to yourself. You don't need to be putting it out there because everybody is seeing it, and it could have detrimental effects later on.
Well said. Fil Waters, hypothetically, this crime happened in Houston, and hypothetically, you were the lead detective. What would you be doing right now to try to quiet, I guess, Stephen Gonzalez and the family? Would you be doing something on your end? Is there anything you can do?
Well, I would have been all along, given what he has done already. I would be all along cautioning to keep these things to yourself. Everyone knows how much you're hurting. Everyone knows this. It doesn't contribute anything to the prosecution to come out and say something like this. So that's what I would be counseling him about. And whether he responds to it or not, I mean, I don't know that these detectives haven't been doing that, but I don't, it's up to him ultimately. It's up to him whether he's going to respond and see what the end game here is, and approach this in that manner. Because I'm telling you, this can really go off the rails quickly in that courtroom if they start to act out the emotion.
We're going to get to that because there was just a court hearing. Real quick, Phil, once again, I am delinquent in asking, how is Nugget? I'm assuming sleeping for the next 2 hours.
Nugget is on her pillow on the sofa, and yes, she is napping.
We'll wake her up at the end. It's enough napping. So Scott Duffy, we'll round out this bit of the Kohberger saga and then move forward. Christy Gonzalez wondered aloud about him being in that house before and says, quote unquote, I think he at least had opened the door, went in and tested the waters and looked around. So she is basically flat out saying that he opened the door to 1122 King Road. And then through their attorney on this one, say that they believe that they found, and this is going to make Phil shake his head. This is pretty important. They believe that they found a connection through Instagram between Bryan Kohberger, Kaylee, their daughter, and Maddie Mogan. He had been following, they say, Kaylee and Maddie's Instagram. The exact quote from Christy Gonzalez, from our investigation of the account, it appeared to be the real Bryan Kohberger account. Scott Duffy, are you in agreement with Fil Waters? And what about this connection that they're putting out in the open? He's got a smirk on when I asked if he's in agreement with Fil Waters, as if to say, how dare you? But Scott Duffy, what about this Instagram connection? That could be really big. I mean, that could be as big as, well, who am I? But it could be as big as a knife sheath to me.
Yes. I mean, and I'm not sure if they're doing through their own circles, trying to figure out the connections through all the social media platforms, or if they're receiving this from law enforcement. So either way, it is very difficult, and I've come across this in quite a few trials when you speak to not just family, and move aside from family of a victim, but just when you speak to anyone, you are asking them to keep this on the down low until it comes on trial. So you're trying to ready them, so to soften the blow, so to speak. But then it's up to them, as much as you try to help keep the information within the confines of that law enforcement circle. Now, of course, that's all provided to discovery. It's not like none of this is not known to the defense. But I do agree with Phil. You start getting it starts to get its own following, so to speak, and then you really start this snowball effect, and then somebody's going to respond, and then some. So at the end of the day, what's getting lost here in the translation is there's a trial that's still yet to be presented. In order to do what prosecution has already said, prosecution has charged somebody. They believe the evidence is significant, and so thereby charged in custody. But they need to put that cherry on top by saying he is now convicted by a jury of his peers, and that's important. And then all the interviews can come about and so forth. So it's a tough thing. Law enforcement has to do what they have to do, but ultimately the families, especially families suffering such pain, it's very hard to keep that close to the vest like law enforcement. But I do agree, it can disrail or derail what ultimately what needs to be done, and that's convict him in court.
By the way, Scott, I'm very jealous of that vest. A vest I could never wear because I was never in the FBI. But that is, if I was an FBI or retired FBI agent, I would wear that everywhere. Phil
You
Waters.
can pick it up. You could pick it up. DC, New York, any vendor on the street.
Oh, really? Oh, I might have to do that then. Then forget what I just said. I am not T-Pain. This is the unfiltered Waters we all know and love. Get the pun. Followed by Lorna McKenzie. I agree with Phil. The Gonzalez family needs to stop putting out comments. I get exactly what Phil is saying, but I also get that if that happened to my child, I would lose my mind. Hope G, look at this. Suddenly, Uncle Phil is the voice of reason. I prefer Joel's toned down lighting too. No one loves the Office from Hell look, apparently. Good point, Phil. I got an extra light, by the way. I should put all of them on red, and it'll look like I am literally in the pits of hell. But that could be fun. So Phil Waters, I don't need to tell you. You know this. The defense team has stated in court filings that there is no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victim. So this goes contrary to what the Gonzalez's are now saying. And there is an investigative reporter, well known, named Howard Blum. He's written extensively about this case, and he's interviewed in this new show on 48 Hours, this new 1 hour that's coming out Saturday night. And I'm going to read this quote to you, Phil, and hopefully you'll give us your opinion on the quote. Howard Blum says, the prosecution would like everyone to believe that it's an open and shut case, but I think the facts they have make the case perhaps more open than open and shut. If there is no connection between Bryan Kohberger and the victims that can be established, then there is no motive. And if there is no motive, then it becomes very hard to make the case that he is the killer. Phil Waters?
And who is this?
His name is Howard Blum. He is an investigative reporter, one of me, and he's been writing for a publication called Airmail, and he's being interviewed on 48 Hours.
Really? Okay. Well, I don't.
You don't need motive. I know that, right, Phil?
I don't know what his credentials are, but exactly, they do not have to prove motive. They don't have to prove why. It doesn't. In the terms of the process, it doesn't make any difference. The fact is that they have enough evidence that leads to a conviction that he did it. That's all that matters. Now, everybody, look, as a homicide detective, that's what I always wanted to find out was the why. I mean, we get in the room, we talk to the interview and how, what, where, when, and all that good stuff. And we get all those answered. But the always question that remains is why? I want to know why. The victims want it. The victim's family wants to know why. So that's always a big issue, but it has nothing to do with the process. And this pontificating about open and shut. It's more open than it is shut. You know what? I mean, okay, this is coming from some journalist, which journalists these days are more known for presenting the facts without telling the truth. I'm sorry. The fact that he's getting on 48 hours is kind of disappointing. Why they would even give him a platform just to say something silly like that.
Unfiltered. Cynthia Thompson, I am begging the judge, show this trial. We're about to get to that in 1 second. I'm retired and want to see all the facts. No victims' photos, forensic or otherwise. Please televise this trial. Followed by Andy Dunn, zero evidence against Bryan Kohberger, shaking my head. I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, but that is a thought that is out there for sure. Some people believe what Andy himself or herself is saying. I don't know if Andy is male or female. It could go either way. This is a super sticker. I'm not sure I fully understand this. Why are there cameras currently zooming on court TV trials? Oh, there you go. I get it now. But Bryan gets special considerations and specifications. So this is coming up because on Wednesday, Scott Duffy, there was a 45-minute hearing. Judge, love that name, basically said, and this is a direct quote, he was speaking to the media about cameras. This was about cameras, this hearing. He says, back off. Sometimes I have trolls and I say buzz off, but Judge says back off. So it's either buzz off or back off, but Judge went with back off, telling that the media was being too much. Defense attorneys for Bryan Kohberger lobbied for either the cameras to be removed altogether from the courtroom or at the very least put in different locations, with worries that the proceedings will turn into a circus. And here's a quote I'm going to read. Jay Logston was the defense attorney present. He says, and I quote, on behalf of the argument to not have cameras, on behalf of Bryan Kohberger, observers' continued failure to comply with the court's June 27th directive, meaning the media gag order, compounds this problem and results in the potential jury pool's constant inundation with conclusory accusations and sensationalistic nonsense guised as factual reporting and analysis. What do you make of that statement, Scott? Does he make a point? Fil Waters has got his eyebrows raised as if to say, I told you so. What do you say, Scott?
I continue to enjoy a camera in the courtroom. I do.
Me too.
But I'm all for it. I've never really learned throughout my career, definitely never had a courtroom in any one of my trials because they were, first and foremost, the Fed system just not allowing it, and never really understood of the trials that I have seen on TV of what the background discussions are on how that actually comes out to play. So this is an education for me to actually see who has a right to know and who has a stake in the game. I would imagine, though, for the sake of the courtroom, that the defense has a big part to play. And so that's ultimately, it would be interesting to see what the judge decides, and is more weight given to the defense's reason for not wanting cameras or very, carefully placed cameras. But I mean, I just enjoy seeing what takes place, because you're going to have that media frenzy outside with people inside doing their sketches and then reporting back what they have heard and possibly missing an important element or not. So when I see a professional display of a courtroom and so forth, you get to see it real time. But I understand the other side of, you start to get to where perhaps the number one goal and the primary of any courtroom is actually to prosecute, convict before jury, right? If you have these court or these cameras and etc., then perhaps somebody is not really listening but watching a camera. So I do understand. I understand the arguments for distractions and perhaps leading to sensationalism as opposed to when the jury has done their job, they will have deliberated and they will either acquit, be hung, or convict. But I do like to see how it unfolds. I'm sorry, I still do.
I do too. So just moving on here. Judge
Well,
Joe.
wait a minute. Wait a minute.
All right, hold on.
You're not going to let all that get out here and not let me comment.
Uncle Phil, I was coming right to you, Uncle Phil. So go for it. The judge, by the way, said he has fears of O.J. Simpson deja vu, calling that a circus. Says social media complicates the matter. Go ahead, Uncle Phil.
Exactly. And now I want to, my trusted colleague here, Scott. I want you to listen to the words he was using. I enjoy watching the trials. I like to see what's going on in the courtroom. Well, that's all wonderful. I do too. But in terms of the process, they are not necessary and they shouldn't be in there. I see these people and this is one time I'm in complete agreement with the defense on this issue. Complete agreement, and with the judge and the prosecution. This thing doesn't need to be in the public arena as a television show. And to me, it dilutes the process because these things are now shown as a movie of the week. And we have an entire industry that is based on cameras being in a courtroom. And that's all fine and that's all well and good. But I see the commentary from people throughout the spectrum. We have a right to see these things. It's about transparency. It's about this. It's about that. You don't have a right to see squat. If you want to go see the trial, then take your butt from wherever you are to Idaho and go attend it. If you want to see it that badly, then go and attend the trial. So this business about cameras in here, and this is all about voyeurism, and I'll use the term rubberneckers. It's the same type of people that want to get down the highway and they see a wreck and they're going to cause another wreck because they've got their head out the window wanting to know what's going on over there on the other side. So I'm sorry. And I know there's going to be a bunch of people offended. They're going to get their panties in a wad because I call them rubberneckers. But you know what? I mean, that's just the way it is. So regarding these cameras in the courtroom and specific to this trial, not necessary, unneeded, and I'm completely behind the judge and the defense attorneys in their arguments for not having them in that courtroom. Because if you remember, the judge, I think you just said he goes back to the O.J. Simpson trial.
Yes, sir. He cited O.J.
I watched it. I'm guilty. I was a rubbernecker. I watched that thing. Of course, I'm watching it from a different perspective, but nonetheless, I'm watching it. And I can tell you, there is no doubt in my mind, if that thing had not been broadcast, there may have been a different verdict because it turned into a daily soap opera is what it turned into. And I guarantee you that the famous line that we heard, if the gloves don't fit, you must acquit. I guarantee you that line would have never been said if there'd been no cameras in that courtroom. That was pure theater for the benefit of the people who are watching on television.
Johnny Cochran, may he rest in peace.
Johnny Cochran, yeah, may he rest in peace. Fine attorney, attorney, and it was given to the dramatic flair. But I'm telling you what, it increased tenfold because he knew that cameras were on him and he was influencing public opinion. So I'm just saying that kudos to the judge, and I agree with the argument from the defense. And regardless of whether Scott and I enjoy this stuff, it ain't about us, and it's not about all of these people that watch it.
There it is.
So
Ferrari dealer.
And it's about, it's about bringing about justice for these 4 beautiful young people that were slaughtered by this defendant, or allegedly slaughtered by this defendant. which I will still refer to as the evildoer. So anyway, I'm off
Ferrari
my
Phil.
talking about the cameras, and I'm sure that's going to get them all started up. So
Is that the Ferrari dealer, Phil? Was that the Ferrari dealer? Was that the wife?
Spam call. Sorry about that. I didn't turn my.
Phil, I would like you to respond to this question. That's why I put it up there. By the way, Anina is watching in Switzerland. My grandmother lived in Switzerland. My mother's European. Used to travel to Lausanne, Switzerland. It's like a postcard there. It's hard to explain how beautiful it is. I took it for granted as a young child, but welcome to Switzerland. Phil Waters.
If I can, Joel.
Yes, sir.
Can I ask my dissenter? Because there is a dissenting opinion.
Yes, please.
If they allow courts or the cameras in the courtroom, will you watch, Phil?
Ooh, great question.
You're asking me that question?
Yes, I am.
Great question. The answer is
yeah. That's it. The body language spoke.
To use your words, Scott, I will enjoy watching.
By the way, right after the trial,
I'm a self-confessed rubbernecker. I'm not going to lie. But I'm just saying, get them out of there.
It's part of Phil's career. By the way, I was at LAX right around the time this trial ended, and it was a cottage industry. I bought a shirt that said, "If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit," and it's one of my biggest losses in history. I don't know what happened to that shirt. Imagine if I still had that shirt.
That's a collector's item.
100%. I'm so upset. Fil Waters, I just want to get you worked up. Andy Dunn, what evidence is there? Tell us. How would you respond to Andy Dunn? Or you wouldn't, I bet.
Well, I'm sure there's much more evidence than we are aware of, but the biggest, we've got video of him in the car. We've got cell phone tracking that he was in that area for hours and and he was at that particular residence several times prior to via the cell phone tracking. Got the DNA on the sheath, of course, is very important. It puts him right there at the scene. What else do they have? Scott, help me out here. They've got the
no, you're touching upon all the right stuff. The DNA, the GPS.
I guess there's some of this stuff that we don't know that they have in terms of what they may have recovered from the car. They processed the car. We don't know what they have in the processing of the apartment. So there's a lot of search warrants that were served. They went back to the location several times. The scene was processed. I'm sure it would appear very, very, in a very thorough manner. So that's just some of the things that we know about. And I think we can look in some of the affidavits on the search warrants, what they were going for, what they recovered. And so I think right now at this point, there are many that we know of, many affirmative links that connect this defendant to that crime scene. And so I think and then of course then we go to his alibi, which I referred to as an admission that he was in fact out that night. And what was he doing? He says he was just out driving around because this is what he was prone to do. So I think there's just what we know. I think there is a lot of solid evidence and affirmative links to him and that crime scene and the slaughter of those young people. And we will see if the prosecution presents enough evidence to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt. That's always the criteria here. So I think at this point, there is more than enough evidence that will put over the line of reasonable doubt.
So there you go, Andy. Sarah Adams, Bob Knight said journalism was 1 degree above prostitution, to which Raul Thomas says, Joel was going to add to his caption, JW, journalist, but he will wait now. Look, I have a real issue with the media in many, many ways. And I tend to agree with Phil. The media so many times, and I'll get off my high horse here, they go under the guise of, giving a voice to the voiceless and being righteous. But most of the times that is not the case. That's just not the case. They're all about the drama. Like I said, it was literally a cottage industry. A lot of careers started during OJ. Greta Van Susteren, Dan Abrams. These people weren't who they are today without that trial. So it is a whole world unto itself, and there ain't nobody who loves the television more than media people. Becky Ireland, hello, STS Nation. My favorite three gentlemen on YouTube, another great show as always. By the way, the next Kohberger hearing is September 22nd. Judge did not hand down a ruling on the cameras. If anyone sees it, it could come as quickly as today. We don't know. But if anyone knows, Bluetooth headset fund from Catherine Regier. Look at that. Are you hearing? There is a tiny bit of echoey static, and I don't know if that's coming from my friend Scott Duffy or Fil Waters, but I'm buttoned up on my side, so that's all I can tell you. I'm trying to get it perfect, but we can't. But we will eventually, because perfection is the only thing that I will tolerate is perfection. Very quickly, favorite true crime podcast and guest. Thank you so much, Mockingbird. I'm trying to bring this up. For those of you who are not here in the beginning of the show, I'm about to put up a picture that could be a little disturbing. Prepare yourselves. 1, 2, 3. We had Josh and Sandy Greenberg on last night. You're looking at their daughter, who's no longer alive. She died in 2011 under suspicious circumstances. The medical examiner, a guy named Dr. Marlon Osborne, look at this photo, ruled this a suicide. They believe it was a murder. They just lost an other court ruling by a 3-judge panel in Pennsylvania. They wanted the manner of death switched to homicide. The case has never been investigated, and there's plenty of evidence out there. Let's just put it that way. It is making me very upset. It's making a lot of members of STS Nation very upset. If you would like to get in touch with Governor Josh Shapiro, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, ironically, just today, he released a number where you can text him, 717-788-8990, 717-788-8990. Bug your elected officials. That's what they're there for, to be bugged, to work for you. So moving along here, this is a story that Scott Duffy was all over the news for. You saw him on CNN. You saw him on Court TV. You saw him almost on News Nation, but not quite. But we saw him everywhere. And that is the Danelo Cavalcante case. And he spoke to investigators, Scott Duffy, and he told them that he planned, in his Portuguese, he told them he planned to escape to Canada by carjacking. He talked to authorities just moments after his capture for hours and hours. And the investigator there, Deputy U.S. Marshal Robert Clark, spoke to ABC News and said, and I quote, he stated he intended to carjack somebody in the next 24 hours and that he was going to head north to Canada. Surprising to you? I've asked this question all week. Did he have a strategy? It appears he did.
Yeah, I'm so glad when these people are caught that they talk, because it's great information to give to future investigators. You know, what is inside the mind of somebody, what is it that they were planning on doing if they had a plan. And with regards to fugitives, ultimately the goal is to get out. But I was surprised, and then of course after him talking to investigators and pretty much given the many reasons why he stayed in the area, a lot of it was he just lied in wait, just to hope, as I believe it was at least three different times, investigators were within feet as he's lying under the brush or something, which goes to show just how dangerous any type of search like this is, with everything and just a amazing terrain and areas to cover. And the local news was covering some of the farmers, and just for a camera to go up and see how in depth some of these not abandoned but not often used housing that are completely accessible to anybody, of just how easy it is for somebody to hide behind an animal and have access to many, many, many weapons, whether it be pitchforks or other things, not to mention, of course, him, what I believe was getting lucky and getting a gun. But once he got that gun, it was a different dynamic. And you can just assume the worst, whether he was going to, whether he desired to shoot law enforcement, shoot his way out, if he were approached, or as he confessed, to carjack somebody. And if somebody put up a fight, what would he have done? Would he have just used that gun as a display of force, or was he ready to use it? I think everybody knows, he was capable and ready to use it. And so just that, again, kudos to law enforcement and sticking it out and the day in and day out search. It's a tremendous amount of tension for anybody involved in that search to come away from it without being killed, without some sort of injury. And that's just from him. Imagine all the other things that can take place. As at any time, there's a lot of law enforcement, and anytime there's a possible sighting, you have every cop in hearing that call, rushing to the scene. That's everybody, lights and sirens to the scene, as opposed to just trying to get in and around traffic. So you definitely could have law enforcement on law enforcement having collided and injured, which has been seen, time and time again. So this was what a great end to this.
Fil Waters, you see the photos here. They are dramatic. You see Danelo Cavalcante coming out of some sort of medical checkup in a medical gown on the left. In the middle, this is right after they caught him with a sullied, a dirty Eagles jersey, which Governor Shapiro took the privilege of saying he was going to get whoever it was stolen from a new Eagles jersey. Instead, he should be working on justice for Ellen Greenberg, but that's my 2 cents. You see them in the middle. And then on the right, Fil Waters, the hero of the day, a Belgian Malinois named Yoda. If you could speak to Yoda face to face right now, Phil, what would you say to Yoda?
Good job, boy.
I could almost tear up from that coming from a
Well,
Marine.
that's all he needs. That's all he needs. I'm telling you. That's all he needs. Good job, boy. You give him a pat on the head and give him a treat. Good job, boy. Good job, Yoda.
And just so you know, I'm working. I am hearing that echo. It is driving me a little crazy. Scott Duffy, mute yourself for a second. Just want to see if that helped. Scott, it's all you. Keep yourself muted unless you're talking. Thank you. Appreciate that. Did you feel bad, Phil, for Danelo Cavalcante that he bled a little from Yoda?
Do I feel bad?
Yeah.
I don't know, not at all. And Yoda did what he's trained to do. Yoda's he's a law enforcement canine officer. And if he were to have been injured in this course, if let's say that this the little Brazilian midget murderer here, let's just say he had tried to harm or had shot Yoda with the .22 rifle that he had, he would have been prosecuted for that. So these canines, they are officers. They're officers just like the police, just like the two-legged ones. And in this particular incident here, he was confronted, and some homeowner, it may have been the place where he actually got the .22 rifle out of the garage, I think. Is that, Scott, is that where he was shot at? The homeowner actually
Yes.
shot him?
Yeah, the bozo text.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I love it. What should we be sorry about?
Okay.
That's the Ferrari dealer. He said no deal.
No, that's my daughter.
Everything okay?
I thought I turned this thing off. Okay.
Your daughter should be watching STS. She should be proud of her father, glued to this week in, week out. That's what she should be
she's
doing.
a heck of a lot busier than to be watching her old man on a podcast.
On a 2-bit podcast.
Yeah. So what but he and this guy had a plan. I too am interested in what he was doing. This guy's a smart guy. And he was doing the polar opposite of what everybody thought he was doing. Everybody thought he's heading south. And now that I think about it, I'm thinking, you know what? We probably should have rethought that why would he head south? Because he's got nowhere to go unless he's going to go to some other South American or Central American country. But the thought that he gave it enough thought that, you know what, I'm going to go the opposite direction in which everybody thought I was. That'll really throw him off. And that's what he was going to do. And I think it's great that he was sharing that, because if the little turd gets out again, then they're probably going to start looking north before they start looking south, or at the same time. And I don't know this to be the case. I'm going to assume this is the case, that when they put at a border watch, that the border watch went out to the borders, north and south. And I don't know, Scott, you might know better than I, but I don't know that isn't done, but where both borders are covered. So, but that he's talking. It's interesting that he's talking, and he's kind of telling what his thoughts were and this and that, how close people got to him. And it's just his stature and his ability to hide in these kind of rough surroundings. I think I saw an interview with his mother, I think, who still lives in Brazil. And he grew up in a heavily wooded, forested, rough area of Brazil. So he is very well familiar with surviving in that kind of an environment. So
yeah, so I read he the guy did not have an easy life. Doesn't forgive you for double homicide, but he was shining shoes to make money to eat at age 5. Little Danelo owes his life to Yoda. I still can't believe he was brought out of those woods alive. Ketchup said, this is the comment right here. I agree with Ketchup here. I was really nervous for our canines at one point when they were getting really close. I mean, Scott Duffy, Yoda could have had a different ending as well. He had a rifle, and they said he was trying to get away, but he was kind of like in a slumber, I think. But I wouldn't put it past him to have fired a rifle round at poor Yoda. You imagine that, Scott Duffy? That's a definite possibility, though, right?
Absolutely. And law enforcement goes to the danger. So, and here's Yoda, who's equal to everybody else in the law enforcement world. I'll be the first, and then heading in, doing exactly what he's trained to do and what he loves to do. I mean, they are amazing to watch. And so from what I have heard, he absolutely was shocked. He was not ready for what was coming after him. And what was his decision at the point of it's not getting up and fleeing the other way? It was crawling his way through, because I think he was successful those 14 days of always laying low and crawling. But he didn't leave his gun behind. He was taking his gun. And so that says a lot as well. And Yoda did exactly, if you're crouched and you're, and Yoda's coming in after him, and he's doing the old crawl with that gun. Yoda took the first bite exactly where he needed to take that bite, and it just shocks the system. And of course, and I think it's amazing too, the irony. Who caught him? Yoda. And who did Yoda belong to? The Border Patrol. And so this tactical Border Patrol, you don't have to worry about the South or North. They came to him. So they were there. It's just amazing at everybody that Pennsylvania State Police put together. And kept nobody in the dark. That's why they did what they did and were successful, because anybody that had anything to offer, they took it. And
Job well
amazing.
done. This is AMJ Durkee. My email is survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. Survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. My cousin is a canine officer, has a Belgian Malinois. He gave up quickly, or he'd be way bloodier. I'm afraid to say this publicly, but I'm about to. So I'm trying to set up a best guest panel, but all four-legged best guests, to speak to them about what Yoda went through. I'm actually trying to get Yoda, but that's next to impossible, to come on the show next week. So I have Radar has already committed. Radar is coming on, willing to come on, but I'd like to get a best guest panel. So if anyone knows any other dogs willing to speak to me about what it's like to be an officer of the law, let me know, and I will put them on the show next week, and I will even give them that's a great question, Black Widower. That I don't know the answer to, but I will find out for you, Black Widower, and I will get back to you. The COE and I were laughing in a good way, saying that Black Widower takes absolutely no crap at all, and in a weird way, sort of like Fil Waters, she tells you like it is, whether you want to hear it or not. That is Black Widower, and you got to respect people for that. Fil Waters, as he is negotiating his Ferrari behind the scenes there. Scott Duffy alluded to this. Danelo Cavalcante, in speaking to, I said Black Widower. I know it's not widower. I never said, it's a Jersey accent. So Danelo Cavalcante spoke to your people, Fil Waters, law enforcement. And according to this person who interviewed him or had knowledge of the interview, and I quote here, he said on multiple occasions, Fil Waters, that law enforcement officers were so close that they almost stepped on him. They were only 5 or 6 feet away. He also admitted that he survived on watermelon. Ironically, when I was feeling a bit bloated and heavy a few months ago, I said to the COE, I should go a week. I asked the COE if this is true. I said I should just eat watermelon for the next week. It's sort of a miracle food. And she talked me out of it. She talked me out of it, mainly because she doesn't want me to look more fit than her. And as a result, I now have a little bit of a belly hanging over my, I'm not wearing a belt buckle right now, but watermelon, it's a wonderful food is my point. He survived on watermelon, Phil. He had a razor in his backpack. That's how he was able to shave. But what about this notion, Fil Waters, that he was so close that they were literally almost stepping on him? Does it surprise you to find that news out?
No, I'm not surprised by anything that he's sharing because he was living it, right? And there needs to be great credit given, by the way, to BORTAC, the border control tactical team that was sent up there. They're based out of El Paso. They go all over the country, but I believe the actual guys that captured this dude, I think, were members of BORTAC, if I'm not mistaken. But is that right, Scott? So yeah, kudos to those guys. They're out there. They're like the U.S. Marshals that I used on the Gulf Coast Violent Offenders Task Force. These guys, that is what they do. They kick doors and they find people and they get people in custody. And these BORTAC guys do it on a national basis, on a nationwide basis. So kudos to them. But the guy, I said it in the beginning that he is the one that's going to determine the outcome of this thing. And that's exactly what he did. And he obviously wanted to live. And even though he ends up being, dog food for Yoda. So he had his weapon with him. And I would imagine that where he was hiding, well, you see where you had the picture up there, didn't you, where they actually found him?
I sure do. And here it is. Here it is.
Didn't you have it up there with the actual? I mean, they took a picture of him like he's, like they bagged a hog, right? I mean,
Yeah. I don't have that photo. I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't
Which I
have
thought
that.
was really cool. That was cool too. They were.
That's a great shot. Great shot.
Oh yeah, that's kind of like you shot the biggest pig in the valley, and now we're going to put them on display here. But so given where they found him, I think that's a double-edged sword for him, because while he is more likely to see them before they see him, he has still got a field of vision that is limited somewhat, and releasing Yoda, I would be surprised if he ever saw Yoda coming. My guess would be, I'd be interested to know, but my guess would be that Yoda's on him before he could do anything like grab that 22, and because it was a rifle, so it's not like it's a pistol that you could just pick it up and start shooting. That's a little bit more cumbersome when you're talking about a long gun. So the outcome is very interesting. He decided it is going to be life for him, and he's ready to go back to 3 hots and a cot for the rest of his life.
What a place to go. Shout out to Space Coast. He is the COE's brother, otherwise known as my brother-in-law. Handsome dude, too, with that hat on backwards. Guy loves the Grateful Dead. And he learned from the best, from his sister, and how to yell at people. Please don't attack other chatters in any form, or I will ban you. Thanks, STS Nation. I hear his sister's voice in my head. But best part of my Friday from Brian Joe. Space Coast is literally rebuilding a computer right now. We had Scott on, and the computer basically died because the software we're using is so powerful. And so Space Coast is rebuilding a computer, and we're back up right after CrimeCon with not only this shot, but the wide shot, cooler graphics, the whole deal. So shout out to Space Coast for working behind the scenes, as well as Meave Moen helps us book all the guests. He's talking to some dogs right now. And look at this, Phil, you're getting tons of love today. I'm looking. I love that Phil thinks before he speaks, something I have never done. I didn't know it was Friday till I saw Phil and Scott. Scott Duffy, look at this. This is a super sticker from Adam Lamparello, who is on the show in the chat frequently. Do you think that most murderers have narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder? I mean, Scott is not a psychologist. Other stories that we're going to move on to right now. But Scott, briefly, what do you think are most narcissistic?
Yeah, I couldn't weigh in on that. Most narcissistic. There's so many different types of murderers. So the most is bothering me. I would give that to Phil to at least answer with regards to his, if that's what he thought. But yeah, I don't know enough about the narcissism part in a murderer. There's all sorts. As I bring on my.
Does your dog attack or no?
No.
Look,
no.
We can't go through. Let's see the face, Scott Duffy. We can't go one episode, and I love it, without a dog somehow getting in there. And by the way, Tiff Knox, have we already had the Nugget check? Yes, we have. Hopefully this wakes up Nugget. What's this guy's name?
This is Pearl.
Pearl?
Yeah, she's not liking it.
Oh, there's Pearl. Clip those toenails on her, Scott Duffy. How dare you? How dare you? Fil Waters, this is part of the show where we start to break down, but still have a lot to go. Is that Jim Croce on the screen behind you, Phil?
Well, actually, that is the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Now, Jim Croce may have been on there because he is in my list of.
There you go. The mystery is solved.
Jim Croce. I have quite a, I've already talked about that, but I have everything from, Chopin to Tom Petty. So, to Johnny Cash. So I've got.
Love me some Johnny Cash. Classical stuff over. No, I love classical too. I just never listened to it. Miss Wheelassie, Pearl's a singer. Yes, she is. She's probably terrified of Jaws over there, getting ready to jump on her. Love the name. Ann Chapman says, even though she spelled it long, maybe Pearl could get a date with Yoda. Scott Duffy, you know people that know. I'm sure you could get your way over to Yoda, being that you're a Commonwealth guy. And that's, oh, look at this. OMG Pearl. She's an angel. Okay, on to this story, by the way, to me is sort of fascinating. I think it will be to Fil Waters. I'm not sure that he knows much about this. A 40-year-old confession. I'm glad you found us too. Mind your business. Took me a second there. I thought it was Mindya, and then I realized the second word was business. I got it pretty quicker than I am not T-Pain, where I thought it was I am not in pain. Fil Waters and then Scott Duffy, but now they're going to yell at me that I'm going back to Phil. I can't win. I'm like you, Phil.
Well, no, Scott's getting most of the discussion today. That's wonderful. He's getting a bunch of airtime on other deals, so yeah. I hope people are getting their fill of, well, I probably shouldn't use that word, right?
Yeah,
their proper dosage of, their overdosage of Scott Duffy.
Look at this comment. I love that canines are considered as officers in that an assault on canine is a prosecutorial offense. $100,000 been invested in these canines before they go to the field. God willing, he'll serve. Yoda did his job, and that you just heard Fil Waters say that is a police officer. And there you go. Love Dave Brubeck, Rebecca B. So many books. So Fil Waters, this is a fascinating story to me. A man walks into a Wisconsin hospital. This is not a joke. This is a real story. And he tells a nurse in Madison, Wisconsin, that 40 years ago, I killed a woman. Officers immediately relay this information at the officers at the hospital to the proper authorities. The victim in this case is believed to be a woman named Terry Dalloway, and I apologize for butchering her name, and this is her right here. And I'm going to get rid of this comment. And you can see here, she was murdered in 1985. She vanished on Valentine's Day, 1985. And there is an investigator, a detective with the Vernon County Sheriff's Office, Fil Waters. He's been on this case for the last 25 years. This is a 40-year-old case. Fil Waters, hypothetically, again, you're in this department. You're this guy. You've been working on this for 25 years. You don't know which way is up anymore. You have no more leads. And you get a call that a guy in a hospital just confessed to this crime from 40 years ago. What do you do?
Well, I was reading about this case, as a matter of fact. And I was looking at the interview, and my first thought was, when this guy confesses, is that they have to corroborate his confession. Just because he says it doesn't make it so. And when I read further down into the article, that detective said just those very words, that they have to corroborate what he is saying and prove up that he is in fact confessing to, that he is actually the person who committed the murder. Just because he's saying it, I mean, there can be all sorts of motivation if he's not, that he's trying to gain attention, whatever. But they have to do their due diligence. Just as mere confession is not going to be enough to pursue a charge. So they got to get it corroborated. He's got to tell them some things that are only known to the investigators, the detectives. And if that is done, then he will be charged with her murder.
By the way, someone is suggesting Yoda keychains. I would buy one in a heartbeat. It could make a lot of money for the police department. I guess he's a board tack dog, so that's Customs and Border Patrol. They probably can't profit off of that in that way. But anyway, Scott Duffy, talk to your people, get it done. Get me a Yoda keychain. Scott Duffy, my question to you, 40 years ago, you see it right there. By the way, the COE said, how do you spell her last name? I said Dolowey. She goes, Dolowey. I said, no, Dolowy. She goes, Dolowy? I said, no, Dolowy. And we started to argue, almost ended the marriage. She thinks she knew how to spell someone's name whose name she doesn't know, never heard of before today. And I said, it is a little strange, but there doesn't need to be another vowel between the W and the Y. And this is what goes on in our household. I'm tired of Instagram where everyone's marriage is perfect. This is what we argued about today. We almost threw down. And by the way, the COE is Latina. She has Latino heritage, and she's a fierce fighter. She's got some of that lucha libre in her. She knows how to box, and she would destroy me in a fight, I'm embarrassed to say. So I backed off, and I said, yes, there's no additional letter. Just please make the graphic. And that's how we got to this point in our day. Scott Duffy, my question to you. How much does murder weigh on a person with a conscience? I don't mean Dennis Rader, who's a serial killer, but I mean someone who may have just done something. Hypothetically, maybe the person, if Ellen Greenberg was in fact murdered, how much would it be weighing on that person or this person 40 years later that they walk into a hospital and just blurt out, I did it? What do you think of that?
Yes, it does weigh on you, and there are plenty of people where it doesn't weigh, the sociopaths and the like that kill and have no remorse. But I would imagine, depending on how this took place, in other words, if it was somebody that did not seek out to kill her and there was some connection or whatnot, and then things happened, and then he feared the worst. For example, how many, just in Philly alone, but just compound it nationwide, how many fatal hit and runs there are? And you're like, how is it that somebody could leave the scene and leave somebody to die? And then, of course, the family comes on and pleads to the public, especially to the one who might be watching. If you're watching, turn yourself in and give justice to someone who just got hit in a crosswalk. So anything different here, there are times, and this is good, where somebody finally says, hey, especially if there are people who have been given a fatal sentence. For example, they're going to have a visit with their doctor, and they're like, hey, you're coming to the end, so wrap it up and tie up loose ends. So there are times, and plenty of instances, where people finally confess, but there are also times when people don't confess and are waiting for that knock on the door by law enforcement in a cold case, and they do confess. They're waiting, right? They're not willing to go through that door themselves, but once that door is open, they're gonna give it up. But so many cold cases that are out there, and for someone just to walk in, it's yes, I can believe it, but absolutely, law enforcement has to treat that very carefully, and hopefully there's only one person that's going to know, that's alive, that's the murderer, of the details of the crime, and if their story fits so carefully with the evidence, then yes. I mean, that was one of my last cases in the FBI, was somebody who 2015 just called me out of the blue, and so me and my homicide partner from the state police went and picked him up, and we listened, and a couple hours he confessed to a triple killing over different times, and that just resolved itself with the final trial in October. So it does happen.
How many years had passed since the last time he killed?
So the murders were 2000, I believe it was 2008. And then he came to us in 2015. And that's exactly what he said, that the last person he killed was just weighing on him. And so he turned himself in. there were some other factors there, but he did say that was something ultimately. So again, that was questioned on the stand. Hey, how many people do you have that just confess? And anybody could come in and just confess. But it was, we took the confession. It was all recorded. But of course, we're just people who are receiving information. I don't know the facts. We are literally Googling information there. And then once we were able to get specifics, we were able to get the right department, and their homicide division then did a secondary, and ultimately they had all the details of the crime scene, and he was able to provide things that nobody else could know. So ultimately that's what it is. It's connecting what the information is given to what the crime scene told you.
Wow, killers with a conscience. Adam Bluefire, who I believe at one point was in Spain. We need Joel keychains. Ironically, you say that mini Carm cutout keychains. For those of you attending CrimeCon, there are going to be some STS keychains. I'm going to make sure that Scott and Phil get all our goodies, and whatever we have left over, we will hand over to STS Nation somehow, some way. But we will have some keychains devoted to Mariah, telling me that I'm wise for relenting to my wife. As the great Fil Waters said, oh, there's an important question here, by the way. I meant to pull this up from Don. 2 questions. Scott, what was in your vodka again? And Phil, what kind of pizza do you order? Great show as always. Scott, what was that drink that you drink? You talked about the infusion.
Yeah, I think somebody corrected me and they were right, but I who cares what the name of it? It's either infusion or transfusion, but go. it is specifically, I believe it's a Tito's vodka drink, and Tito's being a Texan, Austin, Texas.
Phil's a pineapple and pizza guy, which I could not stomach. I don't understand.
No.
But it's ultimately vodka, grape juice, but you can replace it with your favorite juice. But grape juice and a splash of what I have used, Sprite. But it could be
grape or grapefruit. There is a difference.
Grape juice.
It's like investigator and detective. There is a difference, Scott Duffy.
Yeah.
By the way, Fil Waters, do you know what a chancla is? I am not T-Pain mentioned this. She wanted to know about a chancla and my wife. Do you know what a chancla is, Fil Waters? And I asked you that.
Not, but to address the previous question, it's pepperoni pizza. I'm very simple. And I'm very simple with my drinks. Scott, with all due respect, brother, that's way too complicated for me. I'm just a gentleman jack, a shot of gentleman jack on the rocks, and I'm good.
I'm hoping to have one of those with you, Phil, next week, if you will indulge.
And I'll buy.
Yeah, here we go. Chancla is I learned this, and it's ironic because I asked Phil what people don't know is when Phil shows up at CrimeCon, does he change his persona? No, he goes on stage in a Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops. So I texted Phil. I said, are you going to be wearing your Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops? He said, 10-4, roger that, whatever the police lingo is. But then he corrected me and said that flip-flops in Hawaii, and Catherine Rogier would know this, shout out to her, slippas with no R at the end there. And that is what basically a chancla is. And I learned that when I was in Guatemala with the wife, or El Salvador. The women there will throw their chanclas at your head and you have to duck. So you have to be careful. But I didn't know that. I did not know. Again, this is the point in the show where I always wonder if this is someone's first time listening to STS, if they're calling the police themselves or what they're doing, but they're probably in, I don't know, some sort of emotional agony at this point. But anyway, a chancla, look at this. Slippas from Ketchup, and then a chancla is footwear. I'm sure it's sexy footwear in the COE's case. This isn't your grandma's chancla. That is true. But needless to say, they throw chanclas at you. Moving along with the story, as Phil mentioned correctly, this investigator, this detective, said that What's going on?
I was just raising my hand. I wanted to be.
I'm sorry, Phil. Go ahead.
I want to
please.
be polite, of course.
Oh, please.
Back on the people confessing years later.
Yes.
I had 2 cases that stand out in my mind where someone did just that thing. One was a 10-year span, and one was about a year, almost 2 years. And it was very interesting because those people were the type of people where that event, an anomaly in their lives, not something that they ever thought would happen or they would ever find themselves in that situation, but they did commit a murder. And in the one that was the 10-year span, this guy came to know the Lord, became a Christ follower, and was convicted to approach law enforcement and say, I did this. And it happened to be in the area where I was working patrol at the time with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. And so he showed up. I worked night shift. He showed up, said he had done this thing, and we knew the person. We because it's a rural area, but everybody knows everybody kind of thing. And this person had just disappeared off the face of the planet. And at the time, he was planning on leaving and going somewhere and whatever, and everybody just assumed that he did. But he hadn't been heard from in 10 years. And the reason he hadn't been heard from in 10 years is because this guy murdered him and buried him in an area that was heavily wooded at an intersection of some of the roads in a heavily wooded area, and had buried him there, and that's where he remained for 10 years. And then this person comes forward and says, I did this. This is why I did it. And I'll take you to the body. And he did. So we're walking through this. And you can imagine in 10 years, the wooded area now is more heavily wooded, just due to growth. We get in there, and he takes us to the body, and we dig it up, and there he is. So that, I'm connecting these 2 stories, and that is corroboration with someone who comes forward years later and says, I did this thing. So he not only confessed to it, but he took us to where the body was and corroborated what he had done with his story. So yeah, those things do happen.
Fil Waters, out of all of your homicides, percentage-wise, how many would you say percentage-wise of the killers felt some sort of guilt or remorse about what they had done?
It's going to be low.
Really? I thought you were going to say high, actually.
No, I in fact, even the ones, I mean, I had, even the ones I garnered full confessions from or enough admissions from where they put themselves there, but they kind of tried to make excuses about what happened. Gosh, you know what, off the top of my head, I cannot think of one that displayed to me. There might be one, maybe one that was really, really torn up and broke down into true sobs. And
one of all your recorded. Wow.
Off the top of my head, I mean, I can't think of anyone that really at the end of it. I mean, I had one guy, capital murder. He was out looking for somebody to rob, and he walked up and found a little, 4'10" little Latina gal coming home from her birthday party in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock in the morning, and walked up to her, stuck a Glock 40 cal into her throat, said, "Give me your money," and she started fighting, said no, and boom, blew her head off. And after 4 hours of talking to him, he finally confessed. And at the end of it, after I'd had him tell the whole story and he did a demonstration for me about what he did. At the end of it, he apologized to me for wasting my time in the first 4 hours of that conversation. Didn't say anything about her. He apologized to me for wasting my time. So it's interesting stuff, and Scott well knows in that interview room, the relationship you establish with these folks and the things that you learn about them on a personal level and the things you learn about human nature in general.
Yeah, taking a human life is pretty serious. I think I would have been more concerned, no offense to you, Phil, about blowing off her head than I would be to apologizing to you.
Oh, of course.
By the way, wow, that got heavy real quick. Ned Smith says Tito's vodka and chancla is no place but Texas. I have no idea what this means. I'm going to ask the COE. The chancla voladora. No idea what that is. But we do have a restaurant that I've never been to near us called Las Vacas Gordas. You know what that is, Fil Waters? Look at this.
Say that again?
Las Vacas Gordas.
No.
The fat cows. You are a gringo like I am. Look at this, 3 gringos. Crime Sleuth, and is it just me or does STS, I guess that would be me, look a lot like Ryan Reynolds? My wife's going to
I was called Loco Vato one time by a capital murder suspect.
What you were called a what? Say that again. This is
Loco
I love
Vato.
this. This has turned into an episode of 3 white guys speaking Spanish. What is that? What's vato is what? Like what is that?
Well, I was told that it meant, I think I'm pronouncing it right. Loco Vato. It means crazy white guy. Crazy white man.
I'll have to ask the COE. Can you help us out there? Lavata. By the way, that was definitely in Sons of Anarchy. They talked about that stuff. So we'll have to figure it out. We sound like idiots right now, but that's all good. What else? What's the matter with that? So the story is
entertainment broadcast.
Yes. So this is the woman. I want to put up her photo for this part of it because it gets really bad. By the way, Phil was right. The detective said that they've got to corroborate this confession from 40 years ago. The story, the fiance, a guy named Russell Whitey Lee, reported her missing back on Valentine's Day, 1985. 4 days later, this is difficult to hear, authorities find her decapitated, charred body. Her head and her dog were never found. She had just finished work that day. She was working at a bar manager at a place called Piggy's Restaurant in La Crosse, Wisconsin. She had left behind her purse, other personal items. Then Scott Duffy, it turns out that the fiance had a gambling and a drug problem. They did DNA testing when they finally could. He was ruled out. Scott Duffy. Then they find a paint chip. There's a paint chip on the scene that investigators never figured out exactly what maker model car it belonged to. The theory was that she was put into the trunk of the car and the paint chip came from there. They narrowed it down to a 75 GM car, any make model, 77 Cadillacs, 75 Buicks and Oldsmobiles, 66 to 74 Toyotas. I mean, this is every car in America, 75 Pontiacs. I mean, how does that help? Or 75 Chevrolets. This is considered an open investigation. No further comment. But Scott Duffy, what's your gut instinct with all these years of experience? Do you think this guy who's confessing is the killer?
Could be, right? I mean, you're open to it, and somebody, especially how many generations of law enforcement to where this detective is taking on a second hard look. So, it all comes down to, okay, so it's fine. Law enforcement would love to have an individual because then you can go, now you have a place and time and you can go all the way back to where you need to with regards to this particular suspect. What did he drive? Did he have anything that is going to match one of those many vehicles? And then if he did, can we find that vehicle if it hasn't been destroyed? And I'm pretty positive in the sense that a good lab technician, if that vehicle does exist, regardless of its condition and how many times it was painted over, to be able to figure out, okay, we do have a paint chip believed to have come from the car. So if we can find the car, then you can do side by side comparisons. It's amazing what these lab guys can do. And then is it possible, if she was put in the trunk, that something of hers remains in that trunk? So all these things, it's you can't absolutely, you can't take him at his word, but there's plenty he can say that can help you now corroborate and put him there and put a vehicle there, and then be able to make those connections. So it's hopeful and plausible. Just
Abby Taha, simplifying this for the gringos, chanclas are Crocs. Thank you for that. I needed that. Ned Smith, I'm with you on this. I might confess on my deathbed to licking the frosting off a pan of brownies when I was 6. I've done that much later in life, as recently as probably last night. So this is what happens every week. I prepare for Fridays and I say to myself, this is not going to be enough to talk about. And then I over prepare, and I still have 2 more stories, and we're going to try to get through those in the next 15 minutes if we can. So this next story, again, I thought was kind of fascinating, mainly because I was working there at the time. Biggest terror attack in American history. A decade ago, let's see if the COE did her work here, as I scroll up. And no, she did not. I knew she would not. Oh, yes, she did. Look at this. Look at this. I stand corrected. Everyone's going to hate me now. There it is. Dr. Sneha Ann Phillip. She went missing, Fil Waters, 9/10/01. That would be the night before September 11th. Let me lay this out for you. More than a decade after an appeals court decided the mysterious death of a New York City doctor happened September 11th, 2001. So a New York City court has ruled her a victim of 9/11. But now the STSers of the world, my people who have other 2-bit podcasts, are piping up and doing their cyber sleuthing, although I don't do that. And they think that she may have been murdered. And it was fascinating to me because it would almost be the perfect time for a murder. So she was last seen, Fil Waters, on September 10th, as I just said. She was a 31-year-old ER doctor. She was on a 2002 episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and people are wondering, did she run away with a new identity, or did someone get away with murder? She was married to a guy named Dr. Ron Lieberman. They lived in Battery Park, which is literally where the World Trade Center was, or adjacent to it, right down there on the southern tip of Manhattan. Her final text to her mom, she says that she wanted to eat at Windows on the World, which was the top of the World Trade Center. And again, she was last seen, for those of you who are not from New York or have spent time there, there's a store there that I love, and I don't think it's in business anymore, called Century 21, like the real estate agency. And you basically get really high brand names for very cheap prices. And there was a huge Century 21 basically right at the World Trade Center. So she was last seen there, but she was an ER doctor, Fil Waters. So she was a night owl, and she was known to come home between 7 and 9 a.m., but she never returned home, or at least her husband, the doctor, had left for work the day before. I'll stop right there, Phil. This is sort of a fascinating case because, like I said, there was a small window of time where maybe someone could have committed the perfect murder here. Are you going with the New York City court where they say she is a victim of 9/11? By the way, her name is on the 9/11 memorial. Some people think that maybe she was just helping victims of the 9/11 terror attack when she was killed herself. Maybe she was just walking right past there, but they never recovered any DNA evidence, nothing. She just vanished. Fil Waters, your take.
I took a quick look at this story, by the way, but my question was, I mean, what's the thought here that somehow, if the husband's the suspect, that he had some premonition or some inside scoop that 9/11 was going to happen? That's a little.
Yeah, I
hard.
don't think it was a premonition, but let's just say he murdered her that night,
And
and he dumps her body. Yeah, let's just say he happened to murder her that night. He dumps her. This is hypothetical. I'm not saying this guy did it, but you asked the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's the suggestion here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to go back and look and see what were the circumstances leading up to her. If they're putting her, did you just say they put her in the area there, though?
Yes. She would frequently walk by. Her last known sighting was at this store, Century 21, which is literally, it's close enough. It wasn't part of like the impact zone, but she's an ER doctor. So people think she may have run over to help, and then maybe the second tower fell. You know what I mean? It might have been after the first tower or something, and people don't know. But there was, I
guess, how far was the last sighting from where the towers fell? What was the distance?
I would say, and I'm guessing here, like 750 yards, maybe.
Oh, well, you got to let evidence lead you where you need to be. Just based on what we know here, and given that she was a medical doctor, right? She wasn't like a dentist. I mean,
she was an ER doctor. She was an ER doctor, so she
ER doctor. Okay.
Yeah, she was.
And that's no disparaging comment about dentists. I know people, especially in The Hangover, right? That's a hilarious movie. But just from what we know, just from what you're reading here, and from what I read about this case, it seems to be that the evidence is stronger that given who she was and what she did, when this thing hit, that her first response would be to go and render aid in any way that she could. And thus, very unfortunate, that became a victim of the overall attack. So I'm not sure what the motivation here is. Is the assumed accusation against the husband?
I don't think so. But I mean, maybe subtly. I don't know. I think that.
So just.
Oh, look at this. By the way, this show helps with my anxiety. I'm very honestly, from the depths of my heart, happy to hear that. But it has the opposite effect on me. So I apologize.
There's a lot of them out there that, exact opposite.
But look at this. So people know this story. Crochet with Bamkus. Sneha was definitely murdered. I never believed she was I don't know who Crochet is, but Crochet, if you know.
How do they know that? I mean, look. I'm just
Crochet, if you do know stuff, email me, survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. I would love that. Look at this kind comment. Handsome Joel. Love the new studio. Thank you. It's because we don't have the hell lighting. Phil, I'm sorry. So to answer your question, I think the fingers might be pointed at the husband. But what fascinated me really about this story is I don't think anyone suggested, 9/11 is going to happen. I think if there was a murder, someone happened to commit that murder the night before 9/11, and it was just like a perfect storm, if you will. And she was an ER doctor. Scott Duffy, let's let you weigh in, because now I'm worried that everyone's yelling at me that you've been silent too long. Could it have been the perfect storm for a potential murder? But the weird thing is they've identified, I don't know what percentage, almost all the victims through DNA, but there's nothing on this woman. She basically vanished.
Yeah, there are those who have nothing, right? They disintegrate. Just amazing that there are still those seeking answers. So here you have, what's interesting is is she declared missing like through law enforcement 910? Or is it we're backtracking?
She's reported missing, and then eventually it went her family. So eventually her family fought in court to have the death officially linked to the 9/11 attacks, and her name now appears at the memorial in downtown Manhattan, which Scott, that's interesting in and of itself. So
yes.
I don't know from like a legal standpoint, but you always hear how families have a very difficult time like they need a reason, right? So it sounds like her family fought very hard and probably did not want to consider, and I don't know this, but if it was my family, I wouldn't want to consider the fact that they could have been murdered. What do you think? Scott shaking. I
Yeah,
mean, Phil's shaking his head at me.
I'm just as confused as Phil, at least from what I is. So let me ask you this: is there a movement to reopen the investigation?
There's an
And
online
look
movement.
yeah,
And then you see here, people know this case. Someone just said, I remember this case. Sarah Adams says she was murdered. I thought, by the way, Phil, Sarah Adams earlier on offered to be your security on the Big Island if you need security. And I found that interesting.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for the offer.
So if you ever need security, let us know when Sarah Adams is on it. Sarah Adams also here. She's obviously familiar. It says Pat Brown profiled this case. If anyone wants to check it out, look at this. STS Nation. I always say best guess, better community. Her brother killed her. Now, the husband did say that he just assumed that she was either with her brother or her cousin. They both lived in Manhattan. And it wasn't unusual for her to be with her brother, who lived in the West Village. And then at the very end, there were also reports that she was struggling with drug addiction and was about to lose her job. So it sounds like there was a significant amount, if those reports are true, that there was a significant amount of stress swirling in her life. But Scott, how do you even go back? I mean, what do you even do to investigate this at this point? Because 9/11 was such a, like you said, people, as hard as this is to believe, some people did just disintegrate into thin air.
yeah, and I tell you what, Joel, I think I'm more shocked by the fact that the family was able to have her name put on a wall, that is forever a memorial to all those that have been known, identified as a part, and dying on that site. And to add her to that wall when there could be some other issues going on, just that alone is shocking. Because there was a lot. First and foremost, there's a tremendous amount uh, um, of everything with regards to a memorial to those that have died 9/11, in and around, in the air, and so forth. Um, Tremendous amount of compensation, for all the victims. So that's where I'm a little shocked, and I would love. I'm actually now curious to see just how much was swirling in the hours. Right, that's really all they had was hours. The fact that she's declared missing, something happened, foul play or something, as opposed to just a late night doctor who didn't show up somewhere. And then all of a sudden 9/11 happens. Of course, everything shuts down. All of New York is involved with this. So things got lost. But I'm shocked. I just feel like there might be something more to it. The fact that she was cited perhaps the morning of, the fact that maybe the hospital said no, she was in shift, and thereby ran out the door the morning of to give support to the fact that she's a victim of 9/11. But the fact that there's an actual report 9/10, there's too much there to even wrap my head around. But what do you do in law enforcement? There has to be something more to go on. The fact that she's even now on the wall, that there's some, like, I don't even know if law enforcement had the chance to ever speak to the husband, or
I don't.
anybody else that might have. I just don't know.
Yeah, I don't know
The-
either. It's actually very, very intriguing. I'm also very
It is.
intrigued by the 40-year-old confession. So maybe we'll follow those stories up. Jay says, didn't she go on a shopping spree just before she disappeared? This is a fascinating question. I don't know the answer to it. Do we really know how many people are missing from that day, 9/11? I remember, sadly, God, so weird how time goes so fast, because it seems like yesterday that I was walking through downtown Manhattan and looking at all those missing posters everywhere. There were missing posters. And I don't know how many people, if any, are still missing from that day from downtown. I'm sure there's a couple. She, again, is reported a victim of 9/11. Let's, if anyone out there has information on this story, I'd love to hear it. So would Scott Duffy. So would Fil Waters. Last story of the day. Phil, I'm going to put up a photo of a man. I'm going to tell you what he did, and then I would like to get your response to this individual. He is a 19-year-old Minnesota man. His name is Keanu, like the actor, Avery Labate, 19 years old. His girlfriend was a student at St. Catherine University, a women's college in Minnesota. He basically shows up there, surprises her. He goes through her text messages, finds out that she's got some texts in there that I guess were, I don't know, rubbed him the wrong way. He went crazy. It infuriates him. He allegedly holds her against her will for 3 days in her dorm room, threatening to kill her and her family, repeatedly raping her. She said she thought she was going to die. If things couldn't get worse, on Saturday night, while she was in her dorm room held captive, she was waterboarded by this guy. He put her in a bathtub, covered her mouth with a wet washcloth, and began pouring water on her face. Later that day, he also allegedly took a knife and threatened to cut her veins so she would die. He was actually on probation for something similar at the time of this assault. She finally convinces him to let her go to the cafeteria. She goes straight to the security office at the school. He, just on that short stint from when she escapes to go to the security office, he calls her 5 times. He's now being held on $100,000 bail. Fil Waters, if you could get face-to-face with Keanu Avery Labate, what would you say to him?
We're talking about it in an interview setting?
I'm talking about mano a mano.
Oh, mano a mano. Well, that would be a whole different outcome.
What do you think of this behavior?
Well, this guy's he's a monster. And his treatment of, and this was his girlfriend, right?
Correct.
Somebody that he purportedly loves. And he finds something in the text messages that he doesn't like. It looks like she may be stepping out, or she's being a little bit too flirty with somebody else. And this is his response to it, because he's so insecure and lacks confidence in who he is as a man. I recognize he's 19 years old, so he's not much of a man anyway in terms of years, but obviously this threatened his perception of himself when it's in terms of his manliness, or his manhood, his masculinity, whatever it is. And so now he's going to prove, not to her, that's part of it, but he's going to prove to himself that, yeah, I'm in control here, and you want to violate what my perception of our relationship is. I'm going to show you how wrong you were, and I'm going to teach you a lesson. And this guy's, I would imagine he is on that edge between being a sociopath and being a psychopath who's engaged in sociopathic behavior. And a guy like this, I mean, I have had suspects like this. I've put people in prison like this, doing these similar horrific things to women that they say they love. And it's terrible when it happens. And a guy like this, in my judgment, he needs to be punished in the most severest of penalties under the law.
Well said, Ferrari Phil. I agree with you 1,000%. According to reports, this young victim, the female, was so frightened that she just laid next to him, because a lot of people said, well, why didn't she scream? She was too scared for her life. Extreme says evil is always in the eyes, Scott Duffy. And when I look at this, I tend to agree. I've asked you this question before. Have you ever noticed in your cases, Scott Duffy, that evil people have evil eyes?
Yes. I'm a big believer that the eyes are the window to the soul. It's not a cliche. It tells you, it gives you an idea what you are about to encounter. And it also helps me as an interviewer of what my approach may be. So, whether or not this is, whether it's somebody who's absolute evil, and you can it's almost like they're staring right through you, and when you look at them, you don't see any sense of wrong in their eyes. And then there are those that are, you can just tell by looking at them that they are not there with you. And how do you figure out how to get them into the room where they have a sense of presence, and are able to have a logical conversation, whether they're going to be lying or whatnot. But I've had my share of even beyond violent crime, where individuals that I have talked to, I'm just trying to figure out, with all my training and just basic common decency, trying to figure out what my approach would be to interview this person who I just feel like has checked out of that room. I know they're there, but they're not with me, if that makes sense. But this, I would totally agree with Phil. If this, the fact, it bothers me, the fact that it's only $100,000 bail. It bothers me that he's on probation for what could be the same thing of a previous girlfriend, or perhaps the current girlfriend. If he's not treated as if in other words, a significant amount of time, if he's goes through and adjudicated as and being convicted, the third person is not going to be so lucky.
We're going to get the answer to this. We need video of Phil interviewing a suspect. Before we do that, very quickly, Phil will tell us where we find all of that. But this is it. Ellen Greenberg, stabbed 20 times, 10 to the back of the head. They called it a suicide. Her family was just rejected, basically by a court, saying they have no standing. All they want to do is get this case investigated. They have reason to believe it was a homicide. If you're as mystified and angry as I am, you can text Governor Josh Shapiro of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, 717-788-8990, 717-788-8990. Text him, bug him, let him know you want this case to be investigated. Phil, where do we find you in interviewing people in the interview room? And your final thoughts on this beautiful Friday.
Well, you can look on, you can Google me, my show, The Interrogator, 6 episodes of 6 of my cases where I'm in the interview room. You'll see portions of those. The episode of 48 Hours in 2015 called Gone, which was the Michelle Warner case. And there's a lot of that interview there. That was just from the person who was in the room at the time. That was such a, that admission and the way he admitted that he had done what he had done was kind of jaw-dropping. It was for me in the room. It's kind of one of those things where if anybody watches it, there's a point where he pulls his glasses off and he kind of looks and he kind of goes into a little bit of surrender, and then he comes back around and then he just blurts out what he blurts out. And, for a guy sitting in the room, when you hear something like this that is so open and so overt and so direct, my first instinct was then is, I want to spike the football. You want to jump up and, and all that, but you cannot. So you have to maintain your composure and then move on to get the entire story, which is what I ended up doing. So there's all sorts of examples all over the interwebs. There's more, and I'm sure the those folks out there will like this comment when I say it. There's more out there about me than anybody would ever care to know. So I'll.
That's not true, Uncle Phil.
I'll leave it. Well, I don't care. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I can care less. But so my final comments today, I think the one thing that is, for me, all these stories that we have talked about have all had the backdrop of the families that have been affected. Whether it is this doctor in New York, unexplained, with this confession of this guy 40 years later, and of course talking about those 4 beautiful young people in Idaho, and the young lady in Pennsylvania. What has struck me today about today's discussion is the effect that these horrible events have, this ripple effect on the family and friends. And this is why I never, ever use the word closure except in the discussion of the word itself. I've said it before, it's not possible. It is something that is unattainable. And when I hear detectives and law enforcement officials and people using that word, that we hope to bring some closure, I just shake my head and cringe. It is unattainable. It is providing a family expectations that will never be met. So what I always did, the first thing I would say to them is that I am so sorry for what has happened, and that I'm going to do my best. I will make my best effort to find the right person who's done the wrong thing to your family member and bring that person to a measure of justice, in the hopes that that will bring them some peace about what has happened. Because the hole in their heart that has been created by this act of violence will never be filled. There will never be closure. There might be a scab, there might be a scar, but there will never be closure. And it will forever and ever be an open wound. And I just, and ending my conversation with those people, I always told them that every one of them, that they're in my prayers. And I meant it when I said it. And to this day, I still pray for those folks that I came in contact with over the course of my career, that I had the privilege of giving their family members a voice when theirs had been snuffed out. So that's what I've seen, kind of the theme today that kind of developed over the course of these particular stories, just the impact that these types of events have on families.
Beautifully said. This is why I love Uncle Phil. This is why it is so hard for me to say goodbye to these two gentlemen every week, because I love them like uncles and brothers. I don't know who's who, but I guess Phil is my uncle. Feels more like an uncle. Scott's like a brother. Meg P, I watched The Interrogator. It was awesome seeing Phil in action. I totally agree, Phil. Kathy Chapin, the prayer emojis up. Thank you for teaching us this wisdom, Ferrari Phil. And on it goes. I really feel like Phil has, amen, Phil. Phil has really won over STS Nation with tonight's delivery of his thoughts and his commentary. Hope, Hate, Fear. I love my Friday nights with STS. We love you even more. Scott Duffy, my my brother. I was going to say big brother, but I'm probably older than you, so I can't say that. By the way, is Nugget still asleep? I feel like waking her up. Scott Duffy, your final thoughts on this Friday. Are you going out with the wife tonight to maybe have a drink and decompress now that Danelo is caught and you can walk freely in your Commonwealth?
So I definitely think that's on tap for tonight. I think we're going to go out for our long needed walk and wind up at one of the local watering holes.
Did you say you're going to walk to the watering hole?
I think so. I think
how far is the watering hole? Like, how far a walk is this? Look at Nugget. Hey, Nugget. She just looked at me. Nugget's first. Nugget. Scott, how long a walk is it to the closest favorite watering hole? Roughly?
A mile.
A mile. That's awesome.
Maybe a little over.
And I'm proud of you because you're walking and not driving and drinking, so that's good.
I think so. Yeah, I think that will be. It's just a fantastic night here, so I think we're going to take advantage of being outside.
At the risk of being accused of interrupting again, which is exactly what I'm doing, did you see the guy, since you're talking about DWIs, did you see the guy that got arrested in California, DWI on his horse?
I did not see that. I did not see. That's breaking news. What happened?
I mean, really? Are you freaking kidding me? California Highway Patrol arrests some guy riding his horse drunk?
Was he on the road? Was he on the road?
That didn't matter where he was. I'm like, are you kidding? Really? I mean, law enforcement has changed, not for the better. I'm sorry, in California. I am sorry.
We're about to go over that precipice.
I just can't imagine that ever happened in Texas. I guess it has, but holy cow. You know, really.
By the way, if anyone knows if anyone has ever been arrested for driving under the influence while on a horse in Texas, please email me, survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. Phil is the bomb. Chelsea Whitaker says, Nugs, real quick programming note. Please hit that like button if you haven't already.
Sorry, Scott. Get back to Scott. You know, I don't
no worries. Great show, Joel.
I'm already going to get the hate mail.
Couldn't do it without Space Coast, the COE, Meave Moen, Phil, and Scott. Quick programming note. Next week, Monday night, we've got Eric Bland. The Murdoch circus continues. Eric Bland coming on to talk about that. Murdoch was back in court, and we've got a new attorney coming on with him named Nana Spilbor, who's very well known. Tuesday night, Hard Time. That is the title of the thumbnail. We got Danny Masterson, potentially Charlie Adelson, Danelo Cavalcante. They're all serving hard time. We've got 2 former inmates. I'm going to get a third coming on to discuss that. Wednesday, Dan Markel, Charlie Adelson's trial for murdering his brother-in-law back in 2014 is quickly approaching. We're going to be there for opening statements because that was our first true crime case. It's up in Tallahassee. And if anyone can help me out, Radar's coming on the show Wednesday at 5, but I'm trying to find 2 other dogs to talk to. And right on cue, I did not plan this. My dog is barking his head off because he heard Nugget's collar tinkling. Blame it on Nugget. Blame it on Nugget. Scott, be safe. Phil, be safe. Have a great weekend. Happy New Year to all my Jewish brothers and sisters. 5784. Love you, America. Love you, Israel tonight, the Holy Land. Love you, the Republic of Ireland, Philadelphia, Delaware, Hawaii, Houston, Tanzania, Zambia, Botswana. There's a camera. Till next time. See you Monday.
Aloha.